The chart.
Did I take the chart back from you?
I believe so, because I don't have that chart with me.
As a matter of fact, you indicated that you'd never seen the chart until that day, correct?
I mean, I've seen my medical records. The piece, whatever you handed me, I'd never seen till that day.
Okay. And your medical records are known as the chart, correct? And what's in front of you?
Medical record, yeah, I mean, the medical record is the medical record.
Okay. And have you spoken to the prosecution?
I have.
When?
I mean, I spoke to him, I would say the first contact I had was about 2 weeks ago. They called me on the phone.
Okay. And the next contact?
Probably was a text saying that, you know, what date they want me to come in and testify.
Okay. And did you speak to police officers?
I spoke to the people I was speaking to was a detective and the attorney, you know, the prosecutor.
And when was that?
So I was here, what day is today? Today is Thursday. I was here on Tuesday to testify, and I think I was here on Friday to testify.
Last Friday.
Last Friday. And then prior to talking to the other, that's the only other time, you know, we had a phone conversation 2 weeks prior to that. And then there was one other time I came in and spoke with them for half an hour, sometimes in the week preceding Friday, because they wanted to know what my schedule was, that kind of a thing.
So when you had all those contacts with the prosecutors and the police officers, at any time did you say, wait, you needed to speak to the defense or have the defense present?
Did I say that?
Yes.
No.
You knew I existed as of Friday, correct?
I knew you existed as of Friday, sure.
Right. And on Tuesday, when you met with him, did you say, I want to have the defense present?
I did not, no.
Did you hear your lawyer say it?
No.
Now, you spent a lot of time talking with Mr. Lee this morning about the word scratch. You remember that?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know that I talked about, I said he had a scratch on his left forearm. I think.
All right, Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Dr. Mostofi, you have what has been marked Exhibit 181, which are the medical records you have been discussing, correct?
Yes.
And there is a first page, an authorization,
Yes.
and then after that we start getting into the actual medical records, correct?
Correct.
How many pages, could you count for the jury how many pages those medical records are, actually? And I'll move over here.
No. There's 28 pages in this medical record.
Okay, thank you, sir. Now, on page 1, that you and I are both looking at, does the word scratch appear for the wound that was on the left arm of Mr. Freire that you treated?
No.
On page 2, does the word scratch appear?
No.
On page 3, does the word scratch appear?
No.
On page 4, does the word scratch appear?
No.
On page 5, does the word scratch appear?
No.
But on page 5, the word graze wound does appear, doesn't it?
Yes.
Now, you were dictating this,
Yes.
and you said you were using something that auto-corrected?
It's called Dragon voice recognition, so it recognizes your voice and puts down
Okay.
what it hears.
All right. And you got to correct this after, correct?
Yes.
And have you ever seen your autocorrect from Dragon correct the word scratch to make it the word graze?
I have not seen that.
So now we're on page 6. Does the word scratch appear?
No.
But the word graze wound does appear, doesn't it, doctor, on the left forearm, right?
Yes.
Okay. Again, you had a chance to correct this document,
Yes.
and you never corrected to make the word graze the word scratch, correct?
Correct.
All right. And you've never seen your Dragon dictate ever make the word scratch become the word graze, have you?
No.
And on the next page, does the word scratch appear?
No.
But the word abrasion does?
Yes.
Okay. Now, abrasion and graze wounds have a very specific meaning in medicine, don't they, doctor?
They have meanings in medicine, yes.
Okay. And a graze wound can be an abrasion, can it not, doctor?
Yes, it can.
And a graze wound can also be a scratch, correct?
So I guess, I consider a abrasion and a scratch to be the same thing. And my using of the term is when a surface layer is removed from from a surface. And that is the same as a graze and an abrasion.
Okay. In fact, it could also be called a tangential wound, correct?
I wouldn't call it a tangential wound.
Okay. But the surface layer is abraded, right?
The surface, a section of the surface is removed.
Okay. And so when did you learn that the word scratch may be important in your testimony?
I didn't know it is important to my testimony.
Okay, that's fair. All right, so you're using the word scratch, abrasion, and graze wound then to mean the same type of injury on the arm.
Yeah. Usually I use, the reason I use the term scratch is it's a layman's term. Most people understand what a scratch. I try not to use, when I'm trying to explain something to a patient, I wouldn't say you have an abrasion. It's something that I just try to talk in terms that most people understand.
Okay. But in your language, and as you as a medical professional, when you put something in the medical record, you use the word graze wound, scratch, and abrasion to be the same thing.
Well, I would not do that, no.
But you did in this case.
Well, no, I didn't.
Where's the word scratch in the rest of the medical records that you have in front of you?
The word scratch in the, whatever 6 or 7 pages I've looked at is not in the medical record. I mean, I can go through and see if it's there, but if it's not, I'll take your word for it.
Okay. Would you take my word for the fact that it doesn't appear in the medical records that you have in front of you?
I don't usually use the word scratch, when I'm talking about a physical finding that I would find.
But we've established that you have used the word graze wound and abrasion twice each, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And that a portion of the skin from the left forearm was removed, correct?
Yes, a portion of the surface of the skin.
The surface of the skin was removed. Now, you've looked at trauma wounds for a long time, right?
I guess I'll say I've been practicing emergency medicine for a long time, and I've seen all types of wounds.
And as a matter of fact, on your CV, which is very impressive, Doctor, you've written a number of articles, correct?
I have published in the medical literature, yes.
Right. And are any of those articles concerning publications on gunshot wounds?
I don't believe I've published anything on a gunshot wound, but
Okay.
I'd like to look at my CV to be sure.
All right, now, you identified the cartridge or the bullet that you took out of Mr. Frier's right arm, correct?
The foreign body, the metal bullet, was from his right forearm, correct?
And the graze wound / abrasion that you saw on his left arm, could you show the jurors exactly where that was?
I don't have, as I speak here today, I don't have, it was it's in the chart, so he had, the way I would describe it is exactly how I wrote it, because that's my best recollection. He has a small abrasion on his left forearm.
Okay. If I showed you the drawing that is in the chart, would that refresh your recollection as to the location?
Well, my recollection is that it was his left forearm, but you can show me a drawing, and I'd be glad to look at it.
Why don't you turn to the Bates number? When I say Bates number, they're marked on the bottom here, or maybe yours are not. Okay, it looks like this. Did you find that in the medical records? Found it?
Yes.
Okay. And you use these medical records to document the location of the wounds that you treat, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in fact, it's documented here as an abrasion to the left forearm, correct?
Yes.
And there's a specific portion of the left forearm that it shows, correct?
Yes.
And where is that on you from this chart? You show the jury.
Yeah. Sorry. It's up and looks like this was a nursing note, but it's, yes.
Whoops.
Right
I'll get
on
it.
here, he's got an abrasion.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Right here. Can you all see that? And when you said an abrasion, you also just used your fingers to indicate the size of the abrasion, right?
I did use my fingers to indicate the size of the abrasion, but I will honestly say I don't have an independent recollection of how big or small the wound was.
And that's why you have these charts, so you can remember what type of treatment that was given, right?
The reason we have charts are to document the medical record.
Okay. And as you sit here, you can remember, they help you to remember what kind of treatment was given Mr. Freire 5 years ago, correct?
That's correct.
And when they're first done, they also go to the attending physician, correct?
That's correct.
And the attending physician, who was Dr. Popovich?
I don't know who Dr. Popovich is.
Well, let me see if you could look through the chart that you have. Matter of fact, on the second page of the chart that I have, I don't know if it's the second page of yours, and see if the word attending doctor is mentioned. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me that Dr. Popovich was the attending doctor?
No.
Who was the attending doctor there?
I was.
You were. Who reviewed the chart after you had it?
I don't know.
If you know.
The
I don't.
objection's overruled, the answer may stand.
Okay. So you did the chart, and you also made an entry in the chart that you had reviewed it, correct? That's your entry, right?
Where are you referring to?
On the HPI historical.
I'm not seeing where.
Yes.
Is that the HPI
That is the
that you
HPI.
testified, Mr. Lee, about?
Yes.
Okay, and then it says HPI 7/17/5:49 p.m.?
Yep.
And that's right where you have Gray's wound?
Yes.
Right? And then you have historical, correct?
Yes.
And is these your words? The history from nurse's notes was reviewed, and I agree with what is documented.
Yes.
Okay. And you specifically put in there because you had to review the history of the nurse's notes in order to render the most effective treatment for Mr. Freire, correct?
Well, the answer is this chart that you have of 20-some pages, none of, I didn't have all of this, right? What we had was just the emergency medicine chart. So I think we're getting a little bit, you're lumping a lot on.
Fair. Let me
so
see if I can. You had the nursing assessment.
Hold on. Did you finish your answer, Doctor?
Yes?
Okay, put a question.
Thank you. You had the nursing assessment and interventions before you, correct?
Which sheet are you, so that you can tell by the typeface, I can tell by what I had in front of me and what I didn't, because this is a copy of the chart.
Right.
and it's usually in this computer called MedHost. I work on a
Right.
screen, not a electron, piece
Well,
of paper.
you had to know what the nurse found to effectively treat him, did you not?
I mean, I need to know, I do consult with my nurses when I treat patients.
And
yes.
one of the nurses you consulted with, it was a Patricia Burchell.
Trish was part of the trauma team, and yes,
Okay.
she was there.
And that's part of the whole team that you're with for the trauma.
Correct.
And when you're looking at the patient, your initial assessment, as you testified, is to make sure that you're finding and treating life and limb-threatening injuries, correct?
That's correct.
And then matter of fact, you told Mr. Lee and the jury that, right? Correct?
That's correct.
And you said just before that you reviewed his chart, correct?
Ask that again?
You, in direct examination, you said you reviewed the chart, correct?
You may.
Back with you, Dr. Mostofi. Now, I asked you whether or not you had discussed the matter with your nurses just before we left to go to sidebar. And one of the nurses was Nurse Patricia, you called her Trish Burchell, right? Correct?
Yes.
And you had, correct?
Well, I guess I don't like, the answer is when you say discuss, there's the way, I don't discuss things. There's a method. We take care of the patient. We work together. We all have our roles, and we do things together.
And the commonplace is, in your hospital at that point, there's documents that you have to sign, correct?
That's correct.
And there are nurses' handwritten notes in that document, aren't there?
There are nurses' notes.
Okay. And could you pull them out, please? All right, do you have them?
I do.
May I just see what you're looking at, just to make sure?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Doctor, I just turned you to the page of handwritten notes, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and you agree that's part of the medical record, correct?
it is.
And nurses' notes like this are part of almost every medical record, not almost every medical record in your hospital, correct?
That's not correct.
But they're part of this record,
Yes.
all right? And that's because you're a trauma team and people are coming in and things have to be done fairly quickly, correct?
What's the question?
Let me withdraw that. So you signed this page, correct?
Let me make sure, but
On the bottom right?
I did.
Okay. And when Mr. Freire, by the way, did Mr. Freire speak with you?
I spoke with him.
Okay. And when you spoke with him, did you note anywhere in your record that he had trouble speaking with you?
I don't recall. I looked at my physician note, and I did not dictate that I had problems speaking with him.
Out of your physician note and nowhere else in the 20, did you say 26 or 28 pages of records is that note? Is there that note? Is there?
I have not seen that note in the chart that I reviewed.
All right. Did the prosecution discuss that with you, whether or not Mr. Freire's English was good at the time before you testified today?
No.
Okay. So when you, if his English, obviously, you would say, would be good enough that you rely on what he said to treat him, correct?
I recall trying to get a translator in and having a hard time.
You wouldn't take anything that he said in English and use it to treat him if it was not accurate in your mind, because that could lead to wrong treatment, would it not, doctor?
In this case?
In this
counsel,
case.
Or generally?
Well, let's start with generally.
So in emergency medicine, you don't always have complete information.
Right.
Some people don't speak English. I'm definitely not going to wait to get a translator before I treat if somebody has something life-threatening. So you, first and foremost, you do the best you can with the information that you have available.
Well, you had information available from Nurse Burchell, correct?
you know, we work, I guess, it's hard, I can't answer that question.
You had information from Nurse Burchell about Mr. Freire available to you.
When?
At the time, Nurse Burchell and you are in the hospital tending to the treatment of Mr. Freire.
So the answer is it all happens at the same time. They're concomitant processes, particularly in a trauma patient, you know.
And one of the pieces of information you had in Nurse Burchell that was documented in the notes that you had before you is that Mr. Freire stated that both of his friends were killed in a gunfight, correct?
Where are you reading that?
Right, the same page you just turned away from.
So my page doesn't say that. Okay.
Doctor, was that the same page that you had before?
Can you
Was
say?
that the same page you were looking at before?
No.
You're looking at it now, correct?
Yes.
And you see where Nurse Burchell wrote both of his friends were killed in gunfight.
Yes.
You had that information available to you, correct, doctor?
Sustained.
Now, you did meet with the detectives afterwards, right?
No.
Did you meet with a detective?
I don't understand when you're talking about that. Are you talking about this evening or?
This evening.
This week.
Let's keep it to this evening.
Okay.
Did you meet with a detective at the hospital?
I don't recall meeting with any detectives.
Did you meet with a patrol officer by the name of Eric James?
I don't recall meeting with any, you know, there were police there in the room, and when you say meet, meaning we're in the room doing our jobs, I met with some officers, but I don't remember having a big conversation with anybody that I can recall.
Well, did you have any conversation with the police officers?
I don't recall having any significant conversation. I do remember trying to figure out what to do with the bullet, and not knowing where to send it to, I labeled it and sent it to pathology.
You labeled the center pathology. What about Mr. Freire's white shirt?
I have no recollection of his white shirt.
Did you ever see him in his clothes before he was treated?
I have no independent recollection of his clothes that he was wearing.
Did you make a note anywhere in your records about his clothes that he was wearing?
I don't remember, I mean, unless you can show me where I wrote that, I don't remember making any record of the clothes that he was wearing.
And where do you say the bullet went to pathology in the notes?
It doesn't say, is there if you can refresh my memory, I'll tell you where.
I have to ask you this. Where in your notes does it say the bullet went to pathology?
I don't know.
So in other words, you have no way, when you said that that was the bullet that you took from Mr. Freire, except that you remembered it being, to track whether or not that's the actual bullet. Now, there's nothing written in documentation in the hospital records.
I don't see it. It's not something I would write in my note.
Okay. I'm showing you the jar the bullet came in. Okay? Is there anything there that could refresh your recollection as to when you sent it to the pathology?
No.
Okay. Now, in addition to, on the same page where Nurse Burchell notes about the gunfight, she also notes about, at 6:46 is that she, well, why don't you tell us that there was a superficial wound on the left forearm?
It says, there's a note from Trish that says superficial wound on left forearm, cleaned, back is bacitracin, applied and Band-Aid. Discharged to home via taxi.
Okay. Now, by then, you had been in the room with the police officers, had you not?
I remember the police and the paramedics all coming in at once, so they were there. Typically, the police don't go into the care room, they stay outside in the hallway.
Well, let's ask you to refresh your recollection right from the piece of the document that's in evidence. Does it not say that at 3:50 the patient was being interviewed by a detective?
It does. At 3:50, it says patient being interviewed by detective.
Okay, so that was probably at the time that you spoke with, had them in the same room, correct?
Rephrase that.
Okay. Was that the time that you had them in the same room, doctor?
I think you'd have to ask Nurse Patricia.
Well, let me ask you, do you remember what room it is that you met with? Had the police officers in the same room?
I don't remember.
And when you had them in the same room, you were discussing Mr. Ferrier's wounds with them, weren't you?
I don't recall having discussions independently.
Well, when you later wrote and dictated that the history from nurse's notes was reviewed and I agree with what is documented, you didn't make any exceptions to this, did you?
So, that part where I say I read the nurse's note, that's the MedHost notes. So they're two sets. So you're reading something, this is the trauma flow sheet. That's why I think there's a little discrepancy. There's two separate, one's an electronic medical record that I wrote on, and virtually all of my documentation is on that.
Right.
And so I acknowledge that I read the nurse's notes that were in MedHost, and I agree with them. That's what that means.
So are you telling this jury that you have never seen Mr. Ferrier's complete medical record?
I have seen the medical record.
All right. And there's nothing in here you want to correct?
There are things that I would like to correct, sure.
Well, do you want to correct the fact that you wrote Gray's wound twice?
No, I wouldn't correct that.
Do you want to correct the fact that you wrote abrasion twice?
I wouldn't correct that.
Do you want to correct the fact that there's an abrasion on his left forearm over here?
I don't know where I said, I don't know that but I wrote, I wouldn't correct that. The fact, there's a part in the exam that it says, where it says, patient has a small abrasion on his left forearm. I do not want to correct that.
Okay. And you don't want to correct the, where you showed the jury where it was around, is this about right? Am I doing this correctly?
What I would say with that is, that was you telling me to show the jury what the paper showed, and I was showing them. But I am telling you now, I don't have an independent recollection of exactly where the wound was or the length of the wound. So, but what I wrote in the chart is what I put it there for a reason, because...
Okay, and you would hope that the location of the wound in the chart that's on the paper would be the location where the wound is for the hospital records, right?
Yes, I would hope.
The objection's overruled, the answer may stand.
Okay. Now, did you ever recall telling any detective that Mr. Ferrer was suffering from a wound to the right forearm and a grazed bullet wound to the left forearm?
I don't recall saying that, but, it doesn't...
Do you recall any detective telling you that Mr. Ferrer was shot in both arms?
I don't recall anybody saying that.
Okay. But if you just can't recall, you don't know whether it did or did not happen?
Correct.
Okay. Now...
All right, the answer is you don't recall.
The answer is I don't recall.
Okay. Now, there is nothing in your medical records to indicate that the wound on the left forearm that Mr. Ferrer was treated for was done at any different time than the wound on the right forearm, correct?
The chart speaks for itself. He came in, I evaluated him, he had 2 wounds.
Okay. Did you evaluate, when Nurse Birchauer, generally, let's go generally, in your hospital, under your supervision, when a wound is cleaned, it's cleaned with a cloth or some kind of disposable item, right?
There are lots of ways to clean a wound.
Okay. And do you know whether or not the item that was used to clean the wound on the left arm of Mr. Ferrer was ever saved?
No.
Doctor, you've been treating bullet wounds for 17 years, correct?
I've been in emergency medicine for 17 years, and part of my practice is seeing people shot, yes.
All right. Do you know what bullet wipe is?
I do not know what bullet wipe is.
1 second, Your Honor. Dr. Mostofi, it was good speaking to you. I may be speaking to you again after Mr. Lee. Thank you.
Mr. Lee?
Doctor, have you ever saved the gauze, or I'm not a doctor, so whatever it is that you use to clean a gunshot wound, in the 17 years you've been practicing medicine, have you ever saved it for somebody to take custody of?
I have never saved it.
Are you aware of any doctor in your experience who's practiced emergency medicine to save the implements that are used to clean a gunshot wound?
Objection calls for speculation.
Are you aware, doctor?
No, it's this, to your personal knowledge, you may answer.
I have no personal knowledge of people saving used dressings.
You indicated that, or you were questioned by Miss Kenny Bodden about you're sending the metal object to pathology. Is that typically what would happen with a piece of metal or foreign object?
And any foreign body or, things we remove.
And that's not necessarily because you expect it to be examined or studied there, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Generally speaking, is the Department of Pathology, that's the designated place where these types of things go?
It's where we send anything, that, here's the thing is, I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't want to dispose of it. And, there was no one from the police department that wanted it, so I labeled it and sent it to a secure place that somebody who wants it in the future can get at it.
Okay.
And that particular place at 3 in the morning was the pathology.
Now, Doctor, you recalled being asked a number of questions by Ms. Kenny Bodden regarding your having signed off on, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, so I'm going to use the name that you used, Tricia's nursing notes, correct?
Yes.
And in particular, you were asked about her entry regarding something that Mr. Freer allegedly said to her about walking out of the bar, hearing gunshots, and that both of his friends were killed in a gunfight, correct? Now, when you're signing off on her nurse's notes, you're not signing off on whether you think she took that down correctly, are you?
These are her notes. There's a couple things, this is what's called a trauma flow sheet. It's a little different. There's, on this, there's different things like, IV fluids, things. So essentially this is all of it. This is an order. I'm giving, the thing. So the answer is I signed it. These notes are Tricia's notes, and...
Well, you're signing off on the fact that they're Tricia's notes, correct?
Correct.
You're not signing off on whether there was a gunfight, were you?
I have no idea whether there was a gunfight or not. I think you need to talk to Trish.
Obviously, you weren't there.
I was not there, and that's not my note.
And you're not signing off on whether Trish accurately took down what Mr. Freer told her, correct? Because you weren't there for that either.
That's correct.
And you're not signing off on whether...
Objection. It's been leading.
All right, try not to lead, please.
Are you
Or
signing...
don't lead.
I'm sorry. Are you signing off on whether Mr. Freer actually used the word gunfight?
I'm not signing off on the word gunfight.
It's largely having to do with the treatment and that those were her notes.
Yes.
Doctor, do you have an independent memory of during the time of your interaction with Mr. Freire on the early morning of July 16th, 2012? Do you have an independent memory of whether you ever heard him use the word gunfight?
I have no memory of whether he used the term gunfight.
Okay. And when you're treating somebody, at least as far as the physical wound is concerned, does it matter to you whether it was self-inflicted, whether it was in a gunfight, whether it was somebody shooting at him from a tree? Does it matter to you, or does it matter just what the wound looks like?
It doesn't matter how they sustained it to me. I try to take care of the patient, so I'm looking at the injury the wound did to the patient, not how he got it. I'm not trying to investigate.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a few questions. Doctor, you know Nurse Trish Burchell, right?
I know Trish.
You work with her, right?
I do.
Right? Have you ever known her to be inaccurate?
Check.
That's sustained.
Have you ever known her to lie?
Check.
That's sustained.
Would you rely on records that she wrote to give medical opinions in your experience?
Not overruled.
I think, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've worked with a lot of people, and like anything, I oversee nurses, residents, medical students, and in general, they all do a good job. But your job as a supervisor is to oversight and to look at people, and so as a general rule, Trish is an excellent nurse.
Thank you. Now, Doctor, I thought I heard you just say to Mr. Lee that you didn't know what to do with the bullet and no one from the police wanted it. Did I hear you just say that?
If that's what I said, that's what I said. You can read it back, but I didn't know what to do with the bullet, so I wanted to make sure it was secure.
Did you also say no one from the police wanted it?
Nobody there was willing to take it, to say that.
And that's with the police officers in the room with you. No one was willing to take it.
Again, I don't have, there was a, who was there, when, what. I'm standing there holding the thing. I don't want to, I got a whole emergency department full of people. I can't just try to figure out who's going to take it, and I didn't want to lose control of it, so I labeled it and sent it.
And you took the bullet out of Mr. Freire's arm at bedside. It wasn't in the operating room, correct?
It was me and the trauma team at the bedside.
Because it was right there on the, you could just lift it right up, right?
It was, yes, it was superficial.
Okay. And so then you didn't know what to do with it. Now, do you rely on the police to tell you if evidence needs to be saved as a trauma surgeon?
So, I guess I don't know how to answer that question, but can you say
Yeah, let me
that
see if I
again?
can break it down.
Yeah.
In your training as a physician, you're not trained in evidence preservation, are you?
We have some training, particularly with rape kits. In certain things like a rape kit, there is forensics involved, whereas an evidence collection thing.
Okay, that's fair. Now,
Right.
when you go to a bullet situation where you're removing a bullet, you would depend on the police to tell you whether that bullet needs to be retained as evidence, correct?
I would always try to retain
All the time.
all the time.
And you'd also always try to ask the police in the area if they were there, do you want it, right?
I think if they're there, sure.
Yeah, and in this case, no one wanted it, right?
I don't remember exactly, but yes, I sent it to pathology.
Okay. And no one from the police department told you that retaining the gauze from Mr. Freire's wound that you called twice a grazed wound and twice an abrasion in your records, no one told you that that may be important, did they?
I didn't have anything to do with cleaning the wound, so I don't know what you're referring to, but I guess that's the best way I can answer it, because I didn't clean anything with gauze. I don't remember anybody telling me to retain something I didn't have, so.
Okay. Did you ask whether or not you needed to retain anything that may have touched a bullet wound on Mr. Freire?
Ask who?
The police.
No, I didn't. I take care of patients. I don't talk with the police.
All right, and they didn't tell you to? They didn't say, doctor, make sure that anything that cleaned what appears to be a graze wound or an abrasion be retained for future use, did they?
I don't recall anybody telling me that evening.
Thank you, doctor. I have nothing further.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
You may step down. Please watch your step.
Yeah.
Could we retrieve the evidence? Thank you. Commonwealth.
Commonwealth calls Rashidi Sanchez.